Serve us, Btch. Thugs harass a black waitress until bikers step in. Chapter 1: The Grind. The clatter of dishes was the soundtrack to Maya's life. The sizzle from the grill, the drone of the sports channel on the mounted TV, the low hum of after-work chatter. It was a symphony of survival. The Diamondback Diner was a relic, a chrome and vinyl time capsule stranded on a stretch of highway that had seen better days. But for Maya, it was a fortress of solitude and purpose. At 24, she carried the weight of 2 generations on her slender shoulders. Her grandmother, who had raised her, was now fading in a nursing home, her mind clouded by the early mists of dementia. The diner job, with its split shifts and aching feet, paid for that care. Every grease-stained dollar, every reluctant tip, was a brick in the wall keeping the world from crashing down on the only family she had left. She wiped down a formica table, her movements efficient and tired. Her uniform, a pale blue dress with a white apron, was crisp, a small act of defiance against the grime of the place. Her name tag, slightly crooked, read Maya. Her coworker, a lanky, kind-eyed boy named Leo who was saving for community college, shot her a sympathetic glance from behind the counter. "Rough one?" he asked, nodding toward the clock. It was only 7 p.m. "The usual," Maya replied, offering a small, weary smile. "Just 4 more hours." The bell above the door jingled, and the energy in the room shifted. 3 men walked in, and the diner's sparse, respectable crowd seemed to collectively shrink. They weren't just customers. They were an intrusion. The leader was a hulking man in his late 20s, with a thick neck and a shaved head, a spiderweb tattoo creeping up from his collar. He wore a tight-fitting gray t-shirt that strained over his chest. His name was Kade, and he was a regular nuisance. Flanking him were his shadows. Jax, lean and rat-faced, with a perpetual sneer, and the quiet, hulking brute everyone called Moose. They were local trouble, small-time thugs who thought their intimidation was a form of currency. They slid into a booth in Maya's section, their laughter too loud, their presence too large. Maya took a deep, steadying breath, squared her shoulders, and approached with her notepad. "Evening, gentlemen. Can I get you started with some drinks?" Kade's eyes, cold and blue, raked over her from head to toe, a slow, deliberate inspection that made her skin crawl. "Well, look what we have here. The pretty little waitress. Yeah, we'll have 3 beers. Whatever's cheap and cold. And keep 'em coming, sweetheart," Jax added, leering. Maya kept her expression neutral, a mask of professional politeness she had perfected. 3 beers. I'll be right back with those." She turned, feeling their eyes on her back like physical pressure points. At the counter, Leo muttered under his breath, "Assholes. Want me to take their table?" "No, Leo. It's fine. I can handle it." Handling it was what she did. It was part of the job, a tax on her paycheck. She brought their beers. As she set them down, Kade deliberately nudged his glass, sending a wave of amber liquid sloshing onto the table and her apron. "Whoops. Clumsy me," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. His friends chuckled. Maya's jaw tightened. She grabbed a rag from her apron. "No problem. I'll get that." She wiped the table clean, her movements quick and precise. As she finished, Kade reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like a vice. "You know, a real apology would be a smile. You're not much of a server if you can't even smile for your customers." The air left her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the eyes of the other diners on them, a mixture of pity and fear. No one moved. "Let go of me," she said, her voice low and steady, though her hand trembled. He held on for a moment longer, his thumb pressing into her pulse point, then released her with a shove. "Whatever. We're ready to order. And hurry up. We're hungry." Maya took their order, burgers, greasy fries, the works, and retreated to the kitchen, her wrist burning. She leaned against the stainless steel counter, closing her eyes for a brief second, gathering the shattered pieces of her composure. "You okay, Maya?" asked Sal, the diner's owner. A grizzled man in his 60s with a kind heart hidden beneath a perpetual frown of worry. He'd seen the whole thing through the service window. I'm fine, Sal. Just them. Sal sighed, wiping his hands on a towel. I know. Just get them their food and get them out. Don't give them a reason. They're looking for one. That was the unspoken rule. Endure. Don't engage. Their kind fed on reaction. Maya nodded, plating their food with hands that only shook a little. The rest of their meal was a masterclass in low-grade harassment. Snapped fingers instead of using her name. Demands for more ketchup. More napkins. Another beer. Each request delivered with a condescending, sweetheart or girl. They complained the fries were too salty, the burgers too dry, creating problems where none existed, forcing her to make extra trips, to bend and reach and serve. She was their focus, their entertainment for the evening. And through it all, the mantra played in her head. For Nana. Just get through this for Nana. Chapter 2. The breaking point. An hour later, their plates were empty, a landscape of grease and crumbs. Maya brought the check, placing it discreetly on the edge of the table. Whenever you're ready, no rush. She turned to walk away, the relief of their impending departure a physical sensation. Hey! Kade's voice cut through the din, loud and commanding. We're not ready. Maya stopped, turning back slowly. Is there something else I can get for you? Kade picked up the check, glanced at it, and dropped it back on the table as if it were contaminated. Yeah, there's a problem. Here it was. The finale. What seems to be the problem, sir? She asked, the sir tasting like ash in her mouth. Jax leaned forward, his elbows on the table. The service was shit. You got an attitude problem. We ain't paying for this. Maya's stomach plummeted. A $50 tab. $50 that was groceries, that was part of Nana's medication copay. She couldn't just let it go. Sal would have to cover it, and he couldn't afford it either. I'm sorry you feel that way, she said, her voice tight. But the food was consumed. You need to pay the bill. Kade's smile was a venomous thing. Or what? You gonna call the cops, waitress? He drew out the word, making it sound like the lowest form of life. They'll take their sweet time getting here, and then it's our word against yours. He looked at his friends, then back at her, his eyes glinting with malice. Tell you what, you get down on your knees and apologize for your shitty service, and maybe we'll think about paying. Maybe. The diner was dead silent. Even the clatter from the kitchen had stopped. Leo was frozen, his hand hovering over the phone. Sal stood in the kitchen doorway, his face pale. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over Maya. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry in front of these men. She would not give them that. I'm not doing that, she whispered. What was that? Kade cupped a hand around his ear. Speak up, girl. We can't hear you. I said, I'm not doing that. Her voice was stronger now, fueled by a surge of pure, undiluted anger. Pay your bill and get out. Kade's smirk vanished, replaced by a flat, dangerous expression. He stood up, his bulk towering over her. The booth creaked in relief. You don't tell us what to do. You serve us. That's your job. So serve us, bitch. Get on your knees and apologize. The words echoed in the silent diner. A serve us, bitch, that was meant to break her. And in that moment, something in Maya did break, but not in the way he intended. The fear evaporated, burned away by the white-hot fury of being dehumanized in a room full of people who did nothing. She was tired. Tired of the harassment. Tired of the struggle. Tired of swallowing her pride for survival. No, she said, her voice clear and ringing. Get out of this diner. Now. Kade took a step closer, invading her space, the smell of beer and cheap cologne suffocating. You little. The bell above the door jingled again. This time it wasn't a gentle tinkle. It was a sharp, decisive sound, like a knife being drawn. The door swung open and a man walked in, followed by another, and another. They weren't like the thugs. They were something else entirely. They wore leather vests, adorned with patches and insignia. Their boots were heavy and scuffed, their jeans worn. They moved with a quiet, confident swagger that didn't need to announce itself. The air in the diner, which had been thick with tension, now became electric. There were 5 of them. The man at the front, the one who had opened the door, was their obvious leader. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with graying hair at his temples and a weathered, handsome face that had seen its share of trouble. His eyes, a piercing, calm blue, scanned the room and landed instantly on the scene at the booth. The terrified waitress, the 3 thugs, the standing, aggressive Kade. His name was Preacher, and his gaze was like a physical weight. Chapter 3. A different kind of law. The arrival of the bikers changed everything. The thugs, who had been the biggest predators in the room, suddenly looked small, like schoolyard bullies who had wandered into a wolf pack. Kade, thrown off his game, slowly sank back into his booth, his bravado visibly deflating. But he tried to salvage it. "Mind your own business," he muttered, though it lacked its earlier force. Preacher ignored him completely. He walked to the counter and took a seat, his men fanning out, not aggressively, but strategically, occupying the space. Leo, wide-eyed, hurried over. "What can I get for you?" Leo asked, his voice an octave higher than usual. "Coffee, black, for the table," Preacher said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It was a voice that commanded silence to hear it. His eyes never left the reflection of the thug's booth in the mirror behind the counter. Maya stood frozen, caught between the booth and the counter. Her heart was still pounding, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. She didn't know if this was a reprieve or an escalation. Preacher turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers. It wasn't a threatening look. It was assessing, calm. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a message, "You're okay. Stand down." She took a shaky breath and moved toward the coffee pot, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped the glass carafe. One of the other bikers, a massive man with a long, braided beard called Tiny, stood and gently took it from her. "Let me get that, darlin'," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "You look like you could use a minute." He poured 5 mugs of coffee with a steady hand and carried them to the counter. Maya just stood there, feeling unmoored. The thugs were whispering furiously among themselves. The dynamic had been utterly inverted. They were now the ones being watched, judged. The silent, imposing presence of the bikers was a far more effective weapon than any shouted threat. Preacher took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't look at Kade, but he spoke, and his voice carried in the quiet room. "Problem here?" Kade puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim his authority. "No problem. Just settling our bill with the waitress." "Didn't sound like settling," Preacher said, still not looking at him. "Sounded like you were giving her a real hard time." He finally turned his head, his blue eyes locking onto Kade. "That true? You giving this hard-working woman a hard time?" Jax, emboldened by panic, sneered. "What's it to you, old man?" One of the other bikers, a lean, dangerous-looking man with a scar through his eyebrow named Gage, slowly put down his coffee mug. The sound was unnaturally loud. Preacher held up a hand, and Gage stilled. His authority was absolute. "It's everything to me," Preacher said, his voice dropping even lower. "I don't like seeing folks who work for a living get disrespected by punks who've never done a hard day's work in their lives. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Is there a problem with your bill?" The threat was unspoken but palpable. It hung in the air like the smell of ozone before a lightning strike. Kade's bravado finally cracked. He scowled, pulled a wad of crumpled bills from his pocket, and threw them onto the table. "There. Keep the change," he spat, the words dripping with impotent rage. The money fluttered to the floor. There was a long, tense silence. Preacher looked at the scattered bills, then back at Kade. His expression was one of profound disappointment, as if he'd expected better, even from scum. "You made the mess," Preacher said, his tone final. You pick it up. Go to hell, Kade muttered, starting to slide out of the booth. In a movement almost too fast to follow, Preacher was out of his seat. He didn't rush, he didn't shout. He simply stood, and his presence became a wall. His men rose with him, a silent, unified front. I said, Preacher repeated, each word enunciated with cold precision. Pick it up, and then you're going to apologize to the lady. Kade looked from Preacher to Tiny, whose arms were crossed over a barrel chest, to Gage, who was cracking his knuckles with a series of pops that sounded like gunshots. He saw no bluff. He saw only cold, hard reality. Defeated, his face a mask of humiliation, Kade bent down and scooped the money from the sticky floor. He straightened up and held it out towards Maya. She didn't move. She couldn't. Apologize, Preacher commanded. Kade's jaw worked. He looked at the floor, then at Maya. Sorry, he grunted. Didn't quite catch that, Gage said, a cruel smile on his lips. I'm sorry, Kade said, louder, the words ripped from him. Maya finally reached out and took the money, her fingers brushing against his. He flinched as if burned. Now, Preacher said, his voice returning to its normal gravelly tone. You and your boys are going to walk out that door. You're not going to look back. You're not going to come back here. Ever. If I see your faces in this lot again, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. Understood. The three thugs nodded, sullen and cowed. They shuffled out of the booth and towards the door, their earlier swagger completely gone. As they passed the bikers, they kept their eyes fixed firmly on the exit, like scared animals. The bell jingled as they left, and the door swung shut, sealing their retreat. The silence they left behind was profound. And then, a collective exhale seemed to go through the entire diner. Chapter 4, The Aftermath. For a long moment no one moved. Then, the remaining diners, looking sheepish and relieved, quickly paid their bills and filed out, offering Maya sympathetic glances and murmurs of glad you're okay, as they passed. Soon it was just Sal, Leo, Maya, and the 5 bikers. Preacher turned to Maya. You all right? The simple question, delivered with such genuine the adrenaline that had been holding her up vanished, and her knees went weak. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. I'm okay. Thank you. Her voice was thick. Thank you so much. Didn't do anything anyone else in this room shouldn't have done, Preacher said, his gaze sweeping over Sal and Leo, who both looked down, ashamed. Sal stepped forward, wringing his hands on a dish towel. I don't know how to thank you. They've been a problem. I was scared to make it worse. Sometimes not making it worse just lets it fester, Preacher said, not unkindly. Name's Preacher. This is my crew. We're the Ironwood Guardians. He gestured to his men, who gave her nods and small, reassuring smiles. Tiny, Gage, a quiet, older man called Pops, and a younger one with intelligent eyes named Document. I'm Maya, she said, finally finding her voice. This is Sal, the owner, and Leo. You handled yourself with a lot of courage, Maya, Preacher said. Stood your ground when most would have folded. That takes a strong spirit. The compliment, from a man who looked like he'd seen every kind of strength and weakness the world had to offer, meant more to her than he could possibly know. Can I get you more coffee? On the house? Some pie? Sal asked, eager to make amends. Preacher smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face, making him look years younger and far less intimidating. We never say no to pie. They moved to a large table and Maya, on autopilot, brought over a fresh pot of coffee and 5 slices of apple pie. As she served them, her hands were steady. Those guys, they're not going to come back, are they? Leo asked, hovering nearby. Gage snorted. Doubt it. They're cowards. They only prey on the weak. They saw we're not weak. But you'll be gone, Maya said, a sliver of her old fear returning. What happens next week? Preacher looked at her, his expression thoughtful. We're based out of Cedar Creek, About 40 minutes from here. But we've got prospects who ride through this stretch. We'll make sure this diner gets added to the regular route. A friendly check-in now and then. Word gets around. They won't bother you again. The offer was so simple, yet so profound. It was a form of community protection she hadn't known existed. It wasn't the unreliable promise of the law. It was the immediate, tangible assurance of a different kind of order. Sal's eyes welled up. I can't pay you for that. Tiny chuckled. Ain't about money, boss. It's about respect. You run an honest business. She's an honest worker. He nodded at Maya. That deserves respect. And we enforce that. They finished their pie and coffee, making easy conversation, deliberately lightening the mood. They asked Maya about herself, and for the first time in a long time, she felt seen as a person, not just a server. She didn't tell them about Nana. Not yet. But she talked about wanting to go back to school someday, about her love for drawing. When it was time for them to leave, Preacher handed Sal a business card. It was simple, just a phone number and the name Preacher underneath the Guardians logo. A gnarled oak tree with roots shaped like motorcycle forks. You have any trouble, any at all, you call that number. Day or night. Understood. Sal took the card like it was a holy relic. Understood. Thank you. Thank you. Preacher turned to Maya. You take care of yourself, Maya. You've got a fire in you. Don't let punks like that put it out. I won't, she said, and for the first time she truly believed it. They walked out into the night. Maya watched through the window as they mounted their powerful motorcycles. Not the sleek racing bikes, but heavy, rumbling Harley-Davidsons and Indians. The engines roared to life, a symphony of power and freedom, and then they pulled out of the lot and disappeared down the dark highway. The diner was quiet again, but the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of fear and isolation. It was the silence of peace, of a storm that had passed. Leo started wiping down the counter, whistling. Sal began counting the till, a new lightness in his step. Maya picked up the rag and went back to cleaning the thug's booth. She wiped away the ghost of their presence, the sticky rings from their beers, the crumbs of their meal. She cleaned it until it was spotless, until no trace of them remained. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. Her eyes were tired, but they were clear. The humiliation was gone, washed away by a wave of righteous anger and the unexpected tide of a stranger's kindness. The men in the leather vests, the Ironwood Guardians, had done more than just chase off some bullies. They had given her back a piece of herself she thought she'd lost, the belief that she was worth defending. She finished her shift, the weight on her shoulders feeling just a little bit lighter. The grind was still there, the worry for Nana was still a constant ache, but something had shifted. She had witnessed a different kind of strength, a code that valued decency over dominance. And as she locked the diner door behind her and walked to her beat-up car under the vast, starry sky, Maya knew that the echo of those roaring engines would be a sound of comfort, not fear. A promise that in the dark, there were still